I feel like mental health in the workplace in particular, we need to pay attention to this. And as Asian American women, the critical need is higher because of where we sit. We sit in places where we have a lot to do. We still face racism, we still face sexism, we still face community concerns, the pressures of being a woman in this culture, being a mom, being a daughter, being a caregiver, all those things.
Welcome to Identityunveiled. IU is a platform that supports advancement of Asian American women to the executive ranks. We highlight amazing stories of Asian American women becoming the first in their industry or breaking barriers as executives and leaders. The nation is facing a mental health crisis. According to CNN and Kaiser Family Foundation, 90% of Americans feel this way. So as May commemorates AAPI Month or Asian Heritage Month and Mental Health Awareness Month, we thought it was fitting to talk to a mental health expert. Anxiety and depression are the most common forms of mental illness conditions found among adults and the most common condition in the workplace.
So why we felt this was relevant to you listening today is that, well, Asian Americans are 50% less likely than other racial groups to seek mental health services. And women are more likely to suffer from depression than men, according to the National Institute of Health. So our guest today is Dr. Pata Suyemoto. She's the incoming executive director of the National Asian American Pacific Islander Mental Health Association, also referred to as NAAPIMHA. Dr. Suyemoto is one of the authors of Widening the Lens, Exploring the Role of Social Justice and Suicide Prevention, a Racial Equity Toolkit, and she's spoken and written about being a suicide attempt survivor and her struggles with chronic depression and PTSD. She's also the co-founder of the Breakingsilences project, which is an artistic endeavor that provides education about mental health issues among Asian American young women. Welcome, Dr. Pata.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a delight to be here.
So Dr. Pata, tell us about your work at the National Asian American Pacific Islander Mental Health and Breakingsilences project.
Sure. I'm going to start with the Breakingsilences project because chronologically that came before. The Breakingsilences project is a project that educates about the high rates of suicide and mental health concerns among young women of Asian American descent. We wrote a play, actually. Christina Chan, who is a playwright and director and actor, and myself wrote a play called Breakingsilences. It was actually published in an Asian American playwright collective book. And it's a play that it has vignettes about situations that Asian American women might find themselves in around mental health. So for instance, one of the vignettes is about a mother and a daughter, and the daughter's trying to explain that she needs help, mental help. And the mother's response is work harder, which among dominant culture audiences, there's a gasp. And among Asian American audiences, there's laughter because it's so familiar. This is the advice we get when we express our concern about our mental health. Just work harder. You need to succeed, you need to do better, you'll be happier, right? So these kinds of issues are brought up in this play. And, art is a really good place a lot of times in our communities to start this conversation because it's a little removed. It's a step removed. You can watch this thing and talk about it. It's not like anyone saying your family or my family, right? So artistic endeavors, I think, are really good ways to bring up these concerns in community in a way that allows for conversation to happen in a sort of a natural way, because we need awareness in our communities. In terms of NAAPIMHA is a national organization that deals with the mental health of Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities. We do culturally informed mental health trainings, including mental health first aid, which is not our training, it's a national council's training, but we adapt it toward Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities. We also do training called Achieving Whole Health, Body, Mind, Spirit, which is really important because these kinds of wellness in the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities, we don't separate our body, mind, and spirit. It's all integrated. So this program is a wellness program that invites people to think about their wellness in relation to the whole whole of body, mind, spirit. We also have community-based programs. We have a youth program called Friends Do Make a Difference to provide awareness to youth in high school. And then we have a national Asian American Pacific Islander empowerment network called NAAPIMHA, which is a network of Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islanders who have mental health concerns of some sort, either themselves or they're a suicide loss survivor or they're a caregiver of someone with mental health concerns. So all that network is really important because of the stigma in our communities, there's very little place where people can actually talk about it. So, if you have a mental health concern, likely you're not going to go to your family, at least at first, because it's very stigmatized.
And there's so much there that we want to get to because I think there is such a stigma.
Yes.
I do want to talk a little though about this, certainly this cause, this mission of NAAPIMHA is very personal to you.
Yes. I have lived experience with my own mental health concerns, and that's part of it. I have been depressed since I was 12 years old, probably, and then I made an attempt in my life at 16. And for a while I was on disability, so I've been a whole journey of what it means to have mental health concerns. And I've been on a healing journey for many years and, have used many kinds of ways of healing, therapy, medication, and then art and cycling and writing and indigenous ways of healing, such as acupuncture and Reiki. So there's a lot that goes into my healing practices. But, having a mental health issue and living through it is very different than not, because that passion really comes from within me. I'm an educator as well. I have a PhD in education from the University of Pennsylvania. And those combinations of my lived experience and my experience as an educator come together in terms of my desire to really make this issue elevated in our communities because of the stigma, because of the silence, because of the way people react in our communities when you say, I'm a person with lived experience. I feel like I have a mission to speak out because I can speak from my personal knowledge and my theoretical and educational knowledge.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for opening up. I know it's hard, number one, for Asian Americans to open up about mental health because of stigma. Why is it difficult for Asian Americans to talk about their mental health from your point of view?
There's a lot that goes into that question. It's a really big question. Thank you for asking it. We live in a society that has dubbed us the model minority. And the model minority myth that claims that Asian Americans, and to some degree, Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders, do better in school, have higher academic achievement, and are like doing well in terms of the sort of typical measures of society. Now, the reason this is a myth is numbers of reasons. One is that you need to disaggregate the data. If you just look at Asian Americans as a whole, there are over 50 different communities in Asian Americans, never mind Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders. So the diversity in those communities is huge, and we don't acknowledge that. And so, one group may be doing okay in terms of mental health, and another group might be doing very poorly, and we don't see that in the data if it's all clumped together. The other thing in terms of the model minority myth is it puts a lot of pressure on Asian Americans to do well in school, and doing not well in school for Asian Americans is a risk factor for suicide.
Do you think that's the model minority myth, or that's just culturally for us, just a pressure that really showing up and doing your best, and there's such an immense pressure culturally to show up looking,
Sure.
yeah.
Sure, there is the pressure in our cultures to do well, particularly as immigrants coming to this culture where, you want to do well. Your parents have made a lot of sacrifices often, or your grandparents, or, whoever came over. And culturally, there is, that drive to in some ways to acculturate or assimilate and, do the things that you need to do to be successful. So absolutely, there's that piece. But I think it gets pushed into a stereotype, into the model minority myth, when we assume that that's true for everyone. And it's not. There are people who struggle, struggle academically, have learning disabilities, whatever. And that model minority myth has a very strong impact on people in our communities who are struggling for a variety of reasons, having nothing to do with their ability sometimes. So I think, it can be detrimental to think of it, to embrace the stereotype without saying, wait a minute, I mean, we want to do well as a community. We want to, strive in this culture, in the dominant culture. And we recognize that not everyone can do that. And that, in terms of the conversation we're having right now, and that mental health concerns are in our community and they do impact us. And when we pretend that they're not there, or the society pretends they're not there, we don't get resources, for instance.
I think that's absolutely on point. And I think it's important to, you talked about we were very much treated as like a monolith, right? But when you look across, we are a very diverse group of different cultures and different ethnicities. I'm curious, how do we make this real, right? And so what are kind of those numbers out there? Are there facts out there that really counter that mental health and mental health conditions is an issue for our community?
You mentioned that 50% of people with mental health concerns, Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, 50% don't receive services. Actually, it's higher than that. Only 30% of AA and APIs with mental illness received treatment in 2022.
Wow.
So that means that a very small number in terms of the people who could have or needed services received them. That is very alarming, because what ends up happening is that when people do end up needing, it gets critical, right? It's more advanced. So as a community, we're not responding early enough to mental health concerns, and it ends up being very severe when people do get in treatment. So early treatment is really important. The other thing is, it's really important to realize that suicide is the leading cause of death for AA and HPI youth ages 10 through 24.
I mean, that's got to be alarming for parents that are listening in. Asian parents are listening in on this.
Absolutely. I think mental health stigma is such an important thing to consider in our communities, because if we don't start talking about it, we're going to lose children. This is sort of the bottom line, I think. I feel like, we need a lot of things. We need culturally relevant practitioners. We don't have enough of them. We need dominant culture practitioners to have cultural humility. We need to address intergenerational trauma. I mean, so many Asian American communities have had trauma from war, from exclusion acts, from internment camps, ongoing, right? So in addition to the racism faced, say, in COVID, in the Chinese flu and all that kind of thing. So, I mean, there's so many things that impact us. And I think, we really need to start talking about it. I just feel like there's such a lack of ability to share even how we're feeling, right? Really, yeah.
Absolutely. And Dr. Pata, how do you talk to someone that's struggling with their mental health? What should you not do? And what is the right thing to do when you're talking to a friend, colleague, or member?
I mean, I think one of the things is to not judge. If you judge, it's going to shut people down or make assumptions. You're not thinking about suicide, are you? I mean, that's not a real question. The person's going to say, oh, no, of course not. I mean, right? So one of the things I think you need to do is just talk about what you notice. Oh, I noticed that you're looking really sad, or you haven't called me back, right? So noticing and expressing the care, listening non-judgmentally, like really listening to what a person says, encouraging help, professional or self-help, depending on what they need, right? And if you want some guidance, PIMHA has mental health first aid trainings, which are trainings that address how you talk about mental health, both for, early signs and symptoms up to crisis. So we have free trainings for the community that embed the AA and HPI cultural considerations in them that are available. So if you go to NAAPIMHA.org, you can find a listing of trainings for that. The other thing is, if you're in a crisis and you need, help dealing with the crisis, you can call 988, which is the national crisis line number. It's a 3-digit number. And if you're in crisis, you can call 988. If you're having a mental health concern, you can call 988. It's an anonymous call. And if you're trying to help someone and you just want advice, you can also call 988.
Now, Dr. Pata, you were, though, brave enough to come forward and realize during your lived experience that something was wrong.
Absolutely.
What do you say to someone that's fearful of the shame and the embarrassment associated with their illness? I mean, just in light of the cultural stigma.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things is to be that person who doesn't carry that. Like if I approach someone and I put on the stigma, which you can do, just because it's there, is to really try to do the non-judgmental listening and sharing, and also acknowledging it. Yes, there's stigma in our community. And I have done a lot of talks about, when and how and why to share. I actually did one for a Harvard student group, and some of it has to do, I mean, there are places I think we need to share for our hearts. Like if we can share with our families and they're supportive, that means so much. But there are places where it's more dangerous to share, for instance, workplaces, right? And so you have to really assess. You have to assess what the risks and benefits are. Sometimes you have no choice, right? I mean, I had no choice. I had to step out of work for a while, because of my mental health concerns. And so I had to share that. But there are other times where, you don't necessarily want to share that with someone you don't know well unless you had to, right? Or it's a medical situation. So, I mean, I do think there are risks, but I also think that we can address mental health in our communities, in our families, in places that don't have as much risk, and with our children. I talk to my daughter all the time about mental health concerns. She has her own mental health concerns. But the thing that made me really realize that I had done a good job with this was when she had her friend, call me for help. So, I mean, she trusted me enough, and her friend trusted me enough, and they were teenagers. They don't trust the parents. I was like, no, that's not a thing, right? So but she called me because she knew that I was a safe person to talk to. I knew something about it, and I could provide resources.
When you're not feeling right and you need to share it with someone, it's deciphering what's a safe place to do that. And if it's not immediately in your environment, there's resources out there that you can call, lines you can call to get support. And then as a parent, for our women listeners out there, having those conversations and making it an open space and not being judgmental about how your daughters or your sons are feeling is really important to set that precedent.
So important. And I would say, I mean, your audience, myself, we're leaders. And the thing about it is you can also lead from a compassionate place in relation to mental health. I personally feel like I want the people who work for NAAPIMHA to feel like they can bring as much of their authentic selves to the table as possible, because I think the work gets done better that way. But to do that, I have to be open to the fact that someone may have a problem, or someone may have a personal thing that's interfering with their work. And rather than saying that's not appropriate for work, I think it's important for me to say, how can I support you so you can do the best job you can do?
I love that. We really blend our personal lives and professional. Unfortunately, the short end of the stick shows up on both sides, and addressing it head on. And on that note, what are some mental wellness practices that you hear from women to help them manage this type of mental health?
Sure. I mean, one of the things that I really promote is that people make appointments with themselves for self-care.
Okay.
And treat it like an appointment. Like if you had an appointment with a colleague, right? And you had to cancel it for some reason, you would reschedule that appointment. Most people who I'm going to go for a walk this afternoon, they get a call, they can't do it. They don't reschedule it. It just slides. So all of our self-care keeps sliding, right? We don't do it. We start to do it, we get interrupted. We don't think about, how to follow up. So I really encourage people to actually make an appointment with and treat. I mean, you are as important as your colleagues. You are as important as your medical appointments.
Okay, so I got to repeat. So if you're listening to this, that means open up your calendars on your phone or on your laptop and set up an appointment with yourself.
Right. And
Okay.
after you do that appointment, set up another one, because we need consistent self-care, right? And I encourage people to think about what gives them joy. I mean, we're taught to think that self-care is spa day. Well, for some people, maybe that's good. But for other people, it may be, I mean, I'm a cyclist and, do my own mechanics. I mean, like it might be fixing my bike, like that time could be something that's really important in self-care to me. So just really, think about what nourishes you and brings you back to balance. I also think that finding ways to balance body, mind, spirit, to really think about ourselves as holistic.
Can you just clarify the difference between mental illness and then the mental wellness stuff?
Right. Mental illness is a diagnosed condition. And there are parameters for what that looks like. For instance, major depression, you need to have feelings of sadness or lethargy for at least 2 weeks. And, there's a whole diagnostic criteria. Okay. So, and we talk about, oh, I'm depressed, but most people who say that aren't depressed. They don't have depression, major depression as a diagnosis. So language is a little slippery here.
Yeah.
But the other thing that's important is all of our mental wellness. That's important. And you can be struggling with your mental health because of stress, because of family obligations, because of, different kinds of pressures you're feeling. And you can be struggling, but not have a diagnosis, right? I mean, and it's important to address that struggle before it becomes chronic, right? I mean, that's the thing. We function under high stress environments, all of us, who are in leadership positions. So like, how do you manage that high stress environment? And that's mental wellness, right? And so when we talk about check-ins or talk about supporting staff or supporting ourselves, it's really about how do we best support our mental wellness overall, our mental health.
Yeah.
And everyone has mental health. And at NAAPIMHA, we're all about redefining it. We kind of half joke, like, we talk about almost anything. Like we have a Vote for Wellness initiative. So, voting and civic engagement, that too is mental health.
And I'll say one thing that I really resonated when we first met was how you said you also talk about the mental health. There are many cultural issues that make us successful, but also test us. One being, do you speak your native language? You're Asian, like I'm Korean. You don't speak Korean? I've had parents say, you don't speak Korean, you're dumb at a very
Right.
young age. When you're dating in the dating scene, the second question may be, first of all, hey, you connect as Asians, but then do you speak Korean? Like if it's a Korean dating Korean. So tell us about how this impacts mental health.
Our identities are very important to us. And my racial identity is important to me. Now, and sometimes that gets questioned, and that is very harmful. And I think when you don't speak the language, your ancestral language, I don't speak Japanese. And I'm mixed heritage. I see, and in terms of pure blood, I'm not, and that has meant that people treat me differently. It's also meant that impacts how I feel, whether I belong, whether I feel like I belong to the Japanese American community or not, or the Pan-Asian community, and not speaking your language can be a result of many things. In my case, I think it had to do with the fact that my dad was interned during World War II, and they were not allowed to speak Japanese. So he's the youngest of 12 children. He doesn't speak Japanese. He didn't. And so, he knew words from being a child. So when he went to Japan, the only thing he could understand was, the mothers scolding their children. So he lost that language, that ancestral language, in part because of racism. So people have to realize that when you don't speak the language, there's many reasons. Like we talked before, when you come to this country, people want to succeed. And a lot of parents don't speak the language at home because then my children won't be as fluent in English. And that has been I've heard that in the community as well. And the opposite as well, right? We have to make sure our children speak the language. But I think, that becomes a gatekeeping kind of thing. Like, do you belong to that community? And that can be very hurtful for individuals. And I also think that a lot of times, it's hurtful for the community too, because our communities have to grow and adapt. Asian American communities in this country have to adapt to certain things, I believe, including the fact that you have Americanized, quote unquote, English speaking, right?
The reason we did this is we wanted to help the movement towards normalizing mental health, mental illness for the Asian American community. For our women listeners, when you think about the concerns that women have brought to you when it comes to their mental health, what is it normal to feel?
Personally, I think whatever you're feeling is normal to feel because there's a reason for that. But I think the next step is thinking about, okay, I'm feeling frustrated. Why? Right. And sometimes when we interrogate why, you can go into things like, I'm feeling frustrated by a system, for instance, right? Like I'm frustrated by the health system constantly. So how do I address that? I think it's normal to feel overwhelmed sometimes. it's normal to feel sad depending on, how, what's going on in our lives.
And I imagine it's also normal not to know something. I think it's normal to feel like you don't have the answers. It's
Yes.
normal to feel like you may not belong, but you
Yeah.
do. And I think that's the thing, as we talk to so many women through this show, some women, I feel it took them a while to really own who they were. Like you talked about authenticity and to own who they were and to own their feelings. But once they did that, it really kind of opened them up to moving forward and acceptance.
Yes. We can get stuck. We can get stuck in this sort of, negative feelings. And also, I think a lot of times Asian American women in particular reflect back on ourselves. It's our fault, right? It's our responsibility to take care of the world, to take care of our families, to take care of our work, to take care of our leadership, to take care of our communities. Yes, it is. And we have to take care of ourselves.
And sometimes I just say it sometimes feels like, oh, we are, taking care of yourself is another thing we have to do.
That's right.
So yeah, no, but it is so important. It's so critical. Absolutely great message, and it needed to be said.
I feel like mental health in the workplace in particular, we need to pay attention to this. And as Asian American women, the critical need is higher because of where we sit. We sit in places where we have a lot to do. And, we still face racism, we still face sexism, we still face community concerns, the pressures of being a woman in this culture, being a mom, being a daughter, being a caregiver, all those things. And so our mental health is absolutely critical because we're holding up a lot.
Dr. Pata, for those of you who are listening today, if they're seeking help or more information, where can they go?
They can go to NAAPIMHA's website, NAAPIMHA, NAAPIMHA.org. And we have a list of resources for AANHPI communities on that website. I can also provide it to you guys if that's helpful.
This is incredible. Thank you so much, Dr. Pata. For those looking for information, you can reach her at pata at naapimha.org. Thank you for listening in, and make sure to subscribe to our YouTube page for more interviews and join our LinkedIn community.
Sure. Thank you for this opportunity.